Hey, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to enable the chat here. And this is Ciara. For those of you that have not met her, I'm going to enable chat. Ciara, we are so grateful. Her internet went out right before she was meant to get on here.
Yeah, I'm a little flushed from the quick movement with the cords, but we're here. We made it.
I'm like, we were going to jump on a little early. I'm like, where's Ciara? Oh, no. Maybe I told her it was 12 noon her time because she's in Denver. And she's like, no, my internet went out. So we're so grateful she's here and that it worked out.
Yes.
Okay, let me enable the chat. Let's see. Is it not working, everybody? For some reason. Oh, there we go. So make sure you have everyone. I'm going to enable it so you can say hi. Zoom, for some reason, has us have to enable it now. So hi, who's on here? We'd love to say hi to you before we jump in. Oh, hi, Lavanna. So good to see you. Hi, Laura. Welcome. Hi, Laura Ann. I've missed you. Good to see you. Johanna, I've been thinking about you. Johanna lives in Johanna. I always say her name wrong. Johanna, forgive me. She's from Finland.
Wow.
Isn't that so neat? Hi, Shannon. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Shannon.
Got everybody from all over the place. It's so exciting. Liz is in Arizona. Shannon's in British Columbia. Laura Ann, I forget where you are. Lavanna is in North Carolina.
I'm San Francisco.
Oh.
Where I grew up. Yeah.
Did you grew up in San Francisco? I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we are so happy that you're here. And I just want to give you kind of a little bit of an overview before we dive in and I introduce Ciara and let her introduce herself to you. But we are going to be going through this, and the name of this workshop, I actually based it off one of Ciara's blog posts, which was the essential ingredients your teen needs to thrive. We're going to go a little deeper here, and you're going to get to hear Ciara's personal story and what she's doing now. Also, I want you to know at the end, there's going to be a question and answer time. Now, we're a smaller group so far. People, I'm sure, are going to jump in here. So you can share your questions in the chat, okay? And then I'll scroll up, and some of you already submitted them, so thank you for that. But just know you can still ask them, and you might be, as Ciara's sharing, it might, spark a question that you have or something you really want to understand. So you can ask them towards the end, okay? So I want Ciara to share about herself, but I just want to say you reached out to me, I think, first, right?
I made the first contact, yeah.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, she has been such a huge blessing to me. And I noticed so many of you, and I had her on the podcast. And because of Ciara's story and what she's doing now, and it's such a story of hope. And I was telling her yesterday, we met, and I'm like, I can be here all day as a mom and having gone through my own struggles parenting, and, we're always works in progress, right? And life happens, and we always are struggling with something, right? And we're in relationship. But I said, she has such a unique perspective because she's been there, and now she's working with kids and tweens and teens and young adults. So Ciara, I'm very grateful for you. Thank you for doing this.
Of course, Cheryl. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And let's launch in and have you tell a little bit about your story. Some moms know a little bit about it that are on right now, and others don't. We're also recording this, and also, what led you here to where you are today?
Of course. So I say the best way to describe the challenges that I had as a child and a teen was I just didn't know how to be with the sadness that I felt in my heart. And I felt totally lost and alone in the world. And I feel like most people, when they're children, they have more of a innate connection to themselves, to God, to the earth. And a lot of us lose that as, we grow up and we start to feel shame and embarrassment and compare ourselves. So I started feeling having very intense emotional experiences and feeling persistently sad when I was pretty young, like around 8 years old. But I didn't have cause for concern kind of behavior until I was like a little bit older. And then when I was in high school, I just felt so intensely sad and anxious and overwhelmed. My parents had a really messy divorce, and there were other things in life that contributed to that sense of being unmoored or like orphaned. Like I just didn't know where I fit in and where I belonged. But I was so insecure, so sad, and I was just doing anything that I could to try and feel some sense of relief. And that included cutting, it included binge eating and restricting and being suicidal, fighting with my parents constantly. Like every day was a war zone in the house. Sneaking out, not going to school. It was just like I don't even want to say peaks and valleys, because it's like, what were the peaks? It was just like valley and then deeper valley and then even deeper valley. And of course, my parents tried to help me. First, they went the, kind of traditional route that most parents go at first, which is like, let's find a therapist and let's get you on meds. Did that. There was no measurable difference. So then I did other things at home, like outpatient therapy and group therapy, and then an inpatient hospital program. That didn't really help either. I went to wilderness therapy, which I've spoken about, was actually quite profound for me. And then after wilderness therapy, a therapeutic boarding school. So I was in 3 different intense residential treatment environments. And before that, a lot of treatment at home. And I really felt confused throughout the whole process. I felt like a lot of the interventions lacked to give me what I really needed. And so in my young adulthood and current older adulthood, in reflecting on those times, I really wanted to just write about it and speak about it. And then that very organically led to supporting teens and their families through these times.
Yeah. Wow. Such a powerful story. Hold on. I'm just, my fan's on to get rid of background noise, but it's bothering me. Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to ask just some more questions, and then we're going to move in. I didn't say this at the beginning, to some seeking to understand what's happening with your teen and your perspective, Ciara, on that, and then also what parents can do. But I'm curious about, when this started happening and what was happening like at school, and you said when did your parents go through this really difficult divorce?
I was 9.
You were 9. Do you feel like that's part of what kind of started it, or were you already feeling this way?
That's a great question. I do think, and no blame to my parents, because that's what, they needed to do for their lives. I do think it contributed a lot to a fear of abandonment and feeling stable, and feeling like I couldn't trust situations, because to my eyes as a kid, like I had no idea what was going on in their marriage. So to me, it seemed like overnight, my whole world fell apart. Like that was such a major disruption to how I was, orienting myself in the world. And I think that, there's many things though that could have that kind of impact on a kid. Like changing schools can be really disruptive for them, or being bullied, or feeling like they just like don't fit in with their friend group and they get rejected. And I think like and wanting to like answer this question, like I think about like what's different about, 15-year-old Ciara versus like 27-year-old Ciara. It's like when you're 15, you don't have an identity you're comfortable with yet. Like you only really see people your own age. Like most adolescents are very just focused on their peer groups. They're not really, you've maybe noticed this, and I've noticed this. If I'm around a group of adolescents at, a big cookout or there's lots of families, it's like they're looking at each other. They're not really like paying attention so much to the adults. So they're seeing people their own age who are having different life experiences than them, maybe. Like maybe they're more popular or more athletic or whatever sort of variant they're looking at. And because your view is so narrow and what you're oriented towards is in a way like kind of superficial, because that's just the stage of life that you're in. Like you're comparing yourself against other people's bodies and their achievements, and there's so much self-doubt, and you just like amplify that in your head, and you don't yet have like the wisdom or like the richness of a lived life to fill in those kind of feelings with different narratives. So what happened at that age was like I was filling myself up with narratives that I wasn't wanted. I couldn't depend on people. I was always going to be abandoned. I wasn't lovable, all of these stories. And, you just have very little to work with against those stories at that age. So those stories kind of like became very dysfunctional for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because when you were saying, when you were talking about that in the very beginning, sharing your story, and you were talking about your parents' divorce, it was like your perspective, like all of a sudden, like your world, your bottom of your world fell out, and it happened overnight.
Yes.
I love that you're talking about, because I think everybody on here, it's really helpful to understand what it's like to be a tween and a teenager, and that you get so stuck in your head in those voices. And you even think about us as parents. I don't know about all of you in here, but I can get pretty easily stuck in my head. But I'm imagining you didn't probably feel like you had anywhere to go with what was going on in your head.
Exactly. Yeah. And because I was like, so left alone to my own devices, it's like I didn't know how to reframe those painful situations like divorce or peer rejection or bullying. And so I was creating all of these painful and like very wounded narratives about myself.
Yeah. At the time, did you realize that?
Oh my God, no. Like, oh my God, no. I definitely don't want to ever like attribute a maturity that I maybe have like with hindsight that I had then, because my goodness, no. Like, because it's so unconscious. Like you're just forming these belief structures and you don't even realize that you're the one who's making them. Like you're just taking them in as if you're learning like, okay, red means stop. And like the sky is blue. Like you're just taking them in as fact almost.
Yeah. And that's so helpful, because I know that my daughter, Ciara, she has said she never could have articulated it at the time.
Yes. Yes.
And so how was that coming out sideways in your life? Because do you know what I mean by that question?
Like oh, sorry, please continue.
Yeah. Do you know? Because you were yelling. Like you said, it was every day was a battle.
Yeah.
You were sneaking out, you start cutting. I mean, so was that, do you see that as the way that you were verbalizing what you couldn't verbalize out loud and couldn't make sense of?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you actually articulated that perfectly. I think like all of those behaviors were signals and expressions of pain. Like the cutting definitely was a way that I was trying to validate my own pain, because I didn't have words for it and I didn't know how to explain it or how to share it with someone else. So it made me feel like it was real and helped kind of quell that like really intense self-hatred that I had. Because a lot of these stories I was making were that like I was wrong and like I was just like a terrible person and like not good enough. And that's a very, very like heavy feeling to carry around. And so like punishing myself in some way made it feel a little bit easier to carry. And then because I was like so preoccupied with fitting in with people and being like validated and wanted, you know, I would sneak out to go spend time with people, or I would throw the rules out the window because I was like, the most important thing to me is to be wanted. Like I want that more than I want to breathe. So I'm going to like do whatever I need to feel that I'm like fitting in with people and that I'm liked and accepted. And fighting with my parents was like, I just didn't know how to regulate my emotions. And especially my mom, as we talked about, was the only person who was safe. So it was like all day I was going around trying to manage this earthquake inside. And then I'd get home to my mom and I was just like, like, I'm just finally letting it all out now. And obviously like those relationships can be tense because the parents are trying to help the situation, which can sometimes be received in the way it's not intended. And so then there was a lot of kind of combative energy between the two of us. So, but you said it perfectly. Like those behaviors were speaking what I didn't have the words for yet.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's such a helpful perspective to understand. Like I was like, said to Ciara, oh, you got to tell the moms that because mom gets it. Like we get the brunt of it. And she was the safest person for you. So you've been trying to hold it together all day. And you know, she is not going to leave. So I'm just going to let it all out now to the one person that I know is going to stay, no matter how ugly I get.
Yep. Exactly.
And she did. And she did.
Still does.
I know. And that's what you're all doing. And so, you know, I think it's really important for us to understand that. So let's transition just a little bit into what, you know, and working with teenagers, what are their deeper needs? Because we said what they need to thrive is what we're calling this, you know, the workshop, essential ingredients. But in order to really help our kids thrive, we have to understand their deeper needs. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things you said was fitting in. Can you speak to what do you see when you're working with kids in this age group? What are they really needing?
In terms of fitting in?
Yeah, like we were even talking, and I'm throwing this out of left field because we didn't directly talking about it. But what are their deeper needs? Like I know we talked about like their need for control. Like they want that autonomy.
Yes.
They want their friends.
Yeah.
You wanted to belong and fit in. What else was going on?
Yeah. I think the first two that come to mind outside of what you just listed, which I'll speak to as well, was unconditional love and meaning/purpose. I think there's actually so interesting. There's a list, I'm blanking on it now, but it kind of captures the core needs people have. And it's like power and control and fun and freedom. And there's a list, but the first one that came to mind was unconditional love, which I really think is like, if there's one thing that you take away from this presentation that Cheryl and I are giving today, it's like, that is literally the most important thing that you can give your child is unconditional love. And the rest will always figure itself out if you just provide that. But I think, yeah, it's important to recognize like how essential belonging is at that age, because they're individuating. They're kind of in this portal where they're becoming their own person, independent of the family system. And so there's this necessary like pulling away and desire to find their own peer group and fit in with people their own age and kind of navigate like those social webs that they're in. And that's really important. Like it's an important part of their development, and it like takes precedence over a lot at that age. Like that's what I see with a lot of the kids that I work with. It's like they so much just want to feel wanted and liked and accepted by their peer group. And they all want that, but they haven't yet, again, because they're young, like they haven't yet learned, you know, communication or like how to be really vulnerable with each other. So the kinds of relationships that they're often in, and like not all of them, but I'm just speaking broadly, are relationships that are a lot about like posturing or performance rather than like really deep like vulnerability and connection, which is certainly true for me. Like I had no idea how not vulnerable I was with my friends until I like got older and could see. But so it's like that need to feel like really seen and belong, and like that they belong is often not really met, but they're all kind of on this hamster wheel of trying to get it. You talked about the need for control, like positive control, which is another branch of this individuation tree. Like they so much want to feel like I'm making my own rules, I'm my own person, like I have freedom, I have say in my life. And the purpose and meaning, I think, is also really, really essential. Like in a lot of older cultures and like ancient societies, like adolescence was actually this time where they were really being asked to step up. It was like you're learning how to be a functioning and productive member of this tribe or this group that we live in. And so now you're like, if you're a boy, like you're qualified to go on a hunt now. If you're a girl, you're going to learn about how to, you know, and this is like older times, like if you're a girl, you're going to like learn about how to cook and how to like take care of children. Like you're going to learn really essential life skills because you're actually now like respected and so much is expected of you. And even though like, you know, our kind of social structures have really migrated a lot from those more primitive ways of life, like I think that need to feel respected and to feel like I have a purpose, I have a mission, or there's something I'm here that I'm called to do. And that doesn't have to be like starting a company or, you know, going to the moon. I don't even know what I'm saying. It could just be like, I want to be, it'd be like, I want to be, you know, a gardener. Like I care about this plot of land that I'm tending to, or I have, you know, like I really love writing poetry, or I feel like I want to help out at the library. And I know most teenagers are not gardening or helping out at the library. I'm giving examples of things that like warm my heart. But even at that age, like there were times where I felt really plugged into something meaningful. And I think we all need like that perspective for when we feel like I'm lost and I'm floating. Like you need those things to ground you.
Isn't it amazing? Like you're talking about how small your world is in your head, right? And you're looking outside of yourself and you wanted approval, and then you felt like you don't fit in and you felt so insecure. And yet having a sense of purpose gives you more outside of yourself and out of your head, I'm imagining. Do you see that with the kids that you work with? Like we talked about that there's a bigger calling, you know, a bigger, you know, life force out there, bigger meaning to my life versus just this little world, that I'm living in my head.
Yes, you've said that absolutely perfectly. Like being so consumed with like me, like where do I fit in? Am I good enough? And instead looking out at the world and asking like, what is this community asking of me? What is God asking of me? What do I serve? Where do I like add, you know, meaning and like beauty to the world? And like those are questions that like most teenagers are not naturally asking because of our culture, but I think that they're all well able to. They just need some like nudging to do that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. We can talk later if you all have questions on how to help your kid to do that. That's something we can talk about at the end. Okay. What are kids, you know, let me back up. Mm-hmm. We take things so personally as moms. I mean, my kids are older. I'm still taking things personally. And, you know, I'm like, well, if I had done this I shouldn't have done that when she was 3. Like, you know, I messed everything up. I mean, it's so easy, even though I know because of what I do, that's not true. I can find myself going back to that place of like, woulda, shoulda, coulda, or I messed up here, or, you know, whatever our version is of it. But you have some really interesting perspective about the taking it personally and what teens are actually even thinking about. Can you share?
Yes. So I would just reiterate again about how teenagers have their own world. And I said this to Cheryl yesterday. I was like, when I talk to the teens I work with, they talk about their crush, they talk about their friends at school, talk about something. They very rarely talk about their parents. And I hope that actually comes as somewhat of a relief, because to me, I take it to mean that they're very consumed with this individuation process and the identity making and the growing up of, you know, their own journey. It's not that you're irrelevant at all, but the kind of comments that like you make, I don't think are like sticking with them like as much as you might think. I think that teenagers more respond to like the overall tone and like your posture towards them than like a comment that you made at 7:27 a.m. on, you know, Wednesday the 13th.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like Cheryl and I were like talking about this yesterday. Like, this is like an amazing question to be asking, because what I hear in this is basically, you know, the asker of this question is wanting to be present for their teen and focused on their teen, and not just like, you know, self-criticizing and like beating themselves up for not doing it perfectly. I was actually talking to my mom about this the other day, because like my mom still feels so guilty. And like I shared vulnerably here, like, especially with me, sometimes like being very public about this stuff, like she's like, oh my God, what do other people think that like I let some of all this stuff happen to you? Like, how do you feel like now that you're an adult? Like, do you like wish that I had done something different? Like, do you hate me? And I'm like, not at all. Not at all. Like my mom would have like done anything to help me. She would have like cut off her own arm to help me. And I couldn't really feel that back then. But like now that I'm older, like it sometimes brings me to tears, like to think about how much she would have sacrificed for me. And she does no favors to me by feeling guilty. Like, I think that forgiveness is like one of the most important components of healing, because when we're not forgiving ourselves, like we're not actually available for the present moment. And like, I know this from my own experience, and I promise I'm going to come to a point in this eventually, but I feel a lot of guilt because I have a little brother that I wasn't always around for him. And I realized in some moments with him, wow, like I'm holding all this guilt and it's literally like a wall between us. Like I'm not here with him because I'm so in my own head about how I didn't do right by him. And so forgiving yourself will help you actually move more into a new relationship with your kid. And I think two things that Cheryl and I touched on yesterday about what you can say to yourself is, if your kid is going through a tough time, the first thing is to know that struggle is an important part of their development. And there are certain things that you can't protect your kids from feeling. Like they're going to have their heart broken probably, or be rejected by a peer group, or not get a job that they want. Like it's life. And those are important initiations for them to become like a whole healthy adult. And the second thing I would say is like, recall something from your own life, like go back in your own archives and think of something was really challenging for you that you're like, God, that was so hard. And I got through it. By the grace of God, I got through it. And I'm better for having gone through it. And use that as a reminder that the same will be true for your kid.
Wow. Yeah. I know it's so unfortunate that we grow mostly from our struggle, and you have certainly, for somebody that's as a teen that you really went through that, when you look back over all that pain, cutting, having, being suicidal, and then going to wilderness, and then going to therapeutic boarding school, and all the stuff that you went through, you think back, and do you look at that? I mean, I know you said you blame yourself and you have guilt, but can you actually have that perspective now that suffering was serving some bigger purpose?
Absolutely. I almost think of it now like I was like in training. Like I was like in training to be able to serve other people. It was, if someone had asked me when I was 15, would you like to have this experience? No, of course not. I wouldn't have said that then. But I think now, like, not by like my will, but like, by thy will, by like God's will, by a force greater than us, is carrying my life forward in the way that it needs to go. And so, I mean, especially in my case, where this has now become like a very tangible way that I help people, but I don't want people to think that everyone who goes through this has to do something that's as like point A to point B as what I'm doing, because I have so many friends who went through these experiences alongside with me who are not doing what I'm doing, but like their mothers or their teachers or their artists, and their pain became such vital, fruit for how they are just servants in the world.
Yeah, that there was more going on at the time, that now, having gone through it and come out the other side, you can see that you developed strength and resiliency through going through that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I have some other questions, but I just have to just hit pause on the part about the forgiveness piece. And, who here, I would love for you gals to deal in, who here carries that guilt? Like feeling like you've done something wrong, or, if I would have done something different, then my kid wouldn't be struggling the way that they're struggling. Colleen, hi, Colleen, 100%. Every day, Shannon, Laura, yes. And so I hope, I sure know that, yeah, Liz, so much. Sherry, yes. I hope that, we can all learn from Ciara's perspective. Christine, I'm trying to let go of the guilt. My kids are special needs, and I always feel like I could have done more. And I just think about the importance of just being able to forgive ourselves. And isn't it interesting that Ciara says she struggles to forgive herself? And that our kids, what I want us to see, what's touching me right now that I feel like I could cry about, is like the shame that our kids will carry, they carry that they're struggling. We don't think about that, right? And so they feel badly that they're struggling. They feel guilty for how they're acting. I'm imagining, Ciara, that you felt this. I don't mean to fill in the blank for you, but I know that my kids have talked about this when they're screaming and they're emotionally dysregulated, that they would come back. If I was less reactive in the moment, they would come back later and they felt horrible. And so here's this shame and this guilt and this unforgiveness that keeps us from this vulnerability that we can have in our relationships, just like you said, and yet we keep on regurgitating it, and like, I don't quite know the answer, to shaking it off all the time, because I still can fall into that. But I do need to remind myself to practice self-compassion, and that I'm human, and that we all make mistakes, and I'm not God. Like that was what really struck me talking to Ciara. It's like, wow, there's so much that I can't control. And yet a friend said to me one time, this is your daughter's journey. This is her, this is going to be her story, right? So this is your story, and each of your kids is going to have their own story. We have we have less control than we think we do. And so thank you. I just had to get that out, because I know every one of us can struggle with that. And I think that it actually fuels more of our reactivity, because we feel so overly responsible. Then we tend to react more to our kids. Not having control is hard. It's a hard thing to learn. Yes.
Yes.
Oh man, daily.
Yeah. Yep.
Daily.
Cool for that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So I mean, that is so good. See, we could be on here for a very long time talking about all this stuff. So I want you to talk to us because you talk about a lot of what's happening in a teen when they're in distress.
Mm-hmm.
And you use the word, which I thought was interesting, distress. So I know that quite a few of you here, and probably all of us, like you have kids that are really struggling to emotionally regulate. So Ciara, what's going on when a kid's in distress?
I'm so sorry. So I just lost one sentence there. You said like I used the word, did you say distress?
Distress. Mm-hmm. When a kid's in distress, like when they're having trouble emotionally regulate, what's happening? Because you have a very interesting way of explaining it that I like.
Yes. So say for me, when like my nervous system was overwhelmed, it would go into this like really, really tight feedback loop. Like I can even feel in my own body how I just tense up when it's like you're at level 10 activated. I want to fight. I want to run away. I'm like fight or flight. I don't know if everyone knows that language, but it's like your primal brain is there. Like you just want to get out of the frying pan. And was hard for me when I was younger to get out of that stage without hurting myself. Like the only way that I knew how to kind of push the exit button when I was at level 10 was through a dangerous, self-injurious behavior. So I think the important thing to realize is like the time for healing and dialogue is not when the nervous system is on overload. That's not the time for problem solving. That's the time for love and for patience. And adults, as you said, feel so responsible. And especially like when a crisis is happening, like you want to move into action and, you want to get to a point where like you're basically able to be the calm adult who's telling them that they're okay. And I kind of think about it. I was thinking about it this morning because Cheryl and I talked about this yesterday. Like when the nervous system is calm, that's the growth state. That's when you can do healing work. When your nervous system is calm, that's the growth state. When the nervous system is hot, like it's really activated, that's the coping state. Like you're just doing whatever you can to cope with how intense that physical and emotional experience is. And when they're in the growth state and in the healing state, that's the time to give them unconditional love and be there, as we're talking about, just the presence of love while they're going through their healing, they're going through their journey. And then we're talking about when they're really, really dysregulated and they're in distress, that's when they need certainty. They need someone who's literally like an anchor, like a, sturdy, solid base, like while they're the hurricane and they just want to know, like, I can thrash around in this and like get out what I need to. And like, you're going to be there just kind of emanating this certainty. And Cheryl and I talked about just how important it is that, you go and you get what you need to, because you're also a human being and there's vicarious trauma. Like there's a lot of, I know my mom experienced so much dysregulation because like, obviously I'm there, I'm screaming, I'm yelling, I'm like hurting myself, I'm doing really scary things. And she didn't seek out a lot of support for herself because she was so focused on me, but she would have done such a great service to our relationship if she had gotten the support that she needed. As I know, all of the women in this group are here because they're bravely seeking that for themselves so that she could be that anchor and basically just hold down the fort while I was kind of losing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just gave me a picture that I've never thought about before when you were saying the nervous system and, and being hot and you just want to run, fight, flight, freeze. And I was thinking, wow, it's like if you see like an animal, right, like run into stress, right, and there's something after it.
Yes.
Of course, as a mom, we want to go save our baby. Like they're in distress and we want to go rescue them. I mean, I thought of it like when you said it, that it just makes so much sense. If you see like your baby animal, squirrel fall out of a tree, and Farmer Brown or whatever his name was, after I'm going to save you from this danger. Yeah. And then we're in the frying pan with them. I love that you said frying pan. Yeah. I'm like, oh man, yes, the frying pan. But, and you explained it also as like a hurricane. If you get in the hurricane with them, then nobody's in good shape. Like we're in there swirling with them. Yeah. Because we're trying to help to make it better and to stop it. Yeah. But it's not helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things have to cool down. Tell them, I'm going to look at, I want to see some of the comments here, but tell them the story you told me about being in residential treatment and what you witnessed.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot that one. And I also just want to echo one thing you said, which is the urge and the instinct to do that is like literally your maternal instinct. Like, of course, if your child's crying, you want to help them. So I just hope there's no like shaming coming through, that there's something wrong.
No. Yeah.
It so much makes sense. I was telling Cheryl yesterday that because I was in a lot of residential treatment. Sometimes kids would have really extreme meltdowns, like really, really extreme, and staff members would come in and they try to dial, like, what do you need? What's going on? Okay. Like, what do you need? What's going on? Like, how can we help? And the kid would just be like, I don't know. I'm just like upset. And it would just be this like cycle. Like it wasn't going anywhere. And it would almost agitate them more because it would be giving them more fuel to kind of like stoke that angst with, like that just like intense activation. And I was telling Cheryl that there was a time when I was in wilderness, and this was more their kind of protocol there. Not that that they always did this, but this girl was having a really extreme meltdown, and this guide just said, okay, let's all just like sit here and we're all just going to breathe. And she just kept having her meltdown, and she was really going through it. And there was one guy who was like sitting next to her, just kept saying like, I'm here with you. And all the rest of us were just there, like breathing. And it lasted like 3 minutes. Cause like emotions don't actually, I don't remember the exact number, but they don't actually last that long, like the physical experience of an emotion, but it's our thinking that keeps prolonging it.
Mm-hmm. So she was actually getting out of her body and getting out of her head.
Yes.
In that moment, and just the act of expressing it and having people sit with her in that and not do anything was what calmed her down, which helped her to regulate herself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just being
presence. Yeah, that easy. I mean, it's not easy, but
it's simple, but it's not easy.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Simple. Yeah, it's simple, but it is not easy.
No, not easy. Yeah, it's very simple, but it's painful. It's hard. It's difficult to apply, but it is simple. Yeah.
What came to me, the imagery is like when you have a fire going and it's kind of dying down and the coals are like red, and then you have to you poke it with whatever it's called, the stick, and you're poking it, and then it goes up again. Like that's how I think of it. Okay, are we poking the fire, or are we actually just sitting with whatever it is? And you use the word container when we met, to be a safe container when our kids are in distress.
Yes.
So I know what some moms think and will say. They'll say, well, then my kid's able to be disrespectful to me. Then I'm letting them walk all over me. So what would you say to that?
In a moment where they're emotional.
Yeah, they're like, leave me alone. You don't understand. And they're dysregulated. And we want to jump in there and say, go to your room, or stop talking to me like that, or that's not okay. And get really reactive. Mm-hmm. And because we feel like we're letting them get away with something. Mm-hmm. So I have some thoughts about it, but what at that time when that was happening, well, I'm jumping all over the place. So what do you have to, what are
No, I mean,
thoughts?
I can say like, there were definitely moments where that happened, where I was losing my mind and screaming expletives at my parents. My parents were divorced, so like it wouldn't be both of them at the same time. And, they would respond with like anger, and I would go to my room. And I completely understand what you're saying. It's like, if they're being really verbally abusive at times, that's not something you want to endorse or condone. But I think like coming back to the fire image, it's like, if you meet that with like more anger, it's just going to fuel the fire. And that's also not the time usually to try and teach them a lesson about respect. Like that would be a conversation to have in a few hours when things are a little more settled. Because Cheryl and I talked about anger specifically and how that can be a very difficult emotion to be present with, because it can be very fiery and aggressive. And anger is like a sign of distress. Like anger is a sign of like, I don't feel okay. Like I'm upset. And even if it's hard to do in that moment, not seeing their anger as like attacking you, but like they're having some big experience in their own world that they don't know how to communicate right now. Like they have a big feeling and they don't know how to communicate it in this moment. So maybe that's taking space, whatever you need to do to feel like you can kind of come back to a center. But I wouldn't say that that's the moment to try and teach them a lesson about respect. Yeah.
Yeah, that it's not gonna, they're too dysregulated.
You're gonna hear it. Like I was just like, screw you. Like it just made me like, those are important lessons to learn, like for sure. But in that moment, I was angry and I was just like, it's that classic, like, you don't understand. Like, you don't even see me. Like, I'm so upset right now. And you're just angry at me for being upset.
Mm-hmm. And that's the part that we take it personally.
Yeah.
Taking it personally. And we're feeling like, I'm allowing my kid to get away with something that's not okay. But that in that moment, they are just expressing that anger. And a lot of times, what was there, if you think of, I always talk about to the moms that anger's up here, but it's a secondary emotion. There's so much stuff that's going on underneath the surface, but it's coming out as anger.
100%. Yeah.
And what did you have, like, what was deeper than the anger? You were expressing it as anger, but if you really like been honest about it, what would have come out?
It was usually like self-hatred, like, or feeling rejected by my parents. Like I think teenagers also talking about taking things personally, taking things really personally. So if my mom would say something like, hey, like you need to clean your room, or like you need to go on walks during the day, like I need you to do more than you're doing, I just felt like I'm not acceptable to you. Like you want to change me. You don't love me. I felt like she was attacking me. I couldn't make that distinction between my behavior and myself. So a lot of the times when I would be upset, it was because I felt so much shame. And I would just like turn it outwards and get upset with her for even bringing up that feeling in me.
Oh, so what you're saying is like, if we say, have you written your paper yet? How are teens going to hear that?
Well, I don't want to like catastrophize it and say like every time they hear that, they hear like, I hate you. Like, no, it's not like that. But it could be heard as like, you don't trust that I can do this. Like, you don't have faith in my ability to manage my schoolwork, or you're always looking for something to pick at. Like those are maybe some ways it could be heard. Sometimes maybe it's not heard that way. It's just like, oh, leave me alone. But I think because of how tense our relationship was, there were times where I just felt like I just felt like I wasn't getting the love that I so wanted. And I would get really upset and angry at them for not knowing that I just needed love. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, okay. Jess asked a good question. Maybe this will help. She said that point is really relevant. What is a better way to approach it so that they don't feel like I don't think they are good enough? And Jess has a daughter that's she's in 8th grade, and so she's kind of right at this age. So if she's not feeling like she's good enough and feeling like, and I'm not just speaking to you, Jess, like mom's judging her, what's a better way to approach it?
I think the way to approach these things is like to let them know that you're always there if they want support. Like, communicate to them if you need help with school, if you feel like a class is really difficult, if you're having trouble figuring out how to study, you can come to me, and like put it almost on them. And one thing I know some parents have done is almost do like office hours. They're like, hey, every Tuesday I'll be available to help with your, like, I'm just using homework as an example now. Like, I'll be available to help you with your math homework. And I'm here if you want to come ask for help with it. But I think like when we pay attention to like the blinking lights, instead of seeing the bigger picture, like that's where this starts to get really tense, where it like becomes about the math test or like that English paper. And it's like, try and like look at the bigger picture and see that they're on their own journey and they're finding their way, and let them know as often as you can that like that you're available. But I would change the language of it, of like following up with them and like checking in on them, to just letting them know that you're available to help if they want that.
I'm here.
I'm here. What would you add to that, Cheryl?
Well, I guess from my own experience, I think, and moms know that I've talked about this a lot, is in my fear. I know that my daughter, my oldest, felt a lot of judgment. Mm-hmm. And she was struggling too. And so because she was struggling, I wanted to help her, but I was at such a loss as to what to do to help her.
Yeah.
So I would say trying to manage things. Mm-hmm. And I was telling myself a story too. Like you talk about teens, they're telling themselves a story. We all have our own story, right? That we're telling ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I was kind of putting things on her that I thought that needed to be different in order for her to be okay.
Yes. Yep.
And then she was lacking those brakes and steering. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so then I was trying to control her. Mm-hmm. And what I realize now looking back is she was in distress. There's a lot of things that were happening in her life that I didn't understand. And if I could have just been there more. Now, it's never too late, right? Because then I started to learn, and now she just turned 33, but and I joined a support group when she was in high school. So I started to learn these things. But what she really needed is that, like you say, that unconditional love. And that you said, if they get that, if we can give that, then a lot of things, the ship really can right itself. But because I was so scared, I was spending so much time trying to manage her, that then through that managing, she felt like, I'm never good enough for you, Mom.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But then it's, Liz says, thank you, Jess, was thinking this too. Did anything come up for you as I was saying that, Ciara, that you were relating to as a teen and what your mom was doing or your dad was doing?
I feel like moms take on a lot of responsibility for sort of initiating their children into the ways of the world. And we kind of talk about this, like, this is how you need to dress, and this is how you greet people. And you don't order the most expensive thing at a restaurant if another family takes you out. Like there's just rules that you give your kids to try and equip them to be successful in the world. And a lot of time, and there's two pieces to this. Like one piece is like, that's totally necessary. Like you do need to like teach your kids how to function in the world. Like they need to know certain stuff. And the way that I personally experienced that with my mom was sometimes I didn't think she saw that some of maybe her preferences or her beliefs were hers and what she thought needed to be happening, and was trying to sort of enforce like that worldview on me. So then I would sort of hear the lessons that she was teaching, which were, you know, as we're talking about, like, you need to study and you need to like wake up on time and do these things. And I would be like, you're the person who's trying to kind of enforce like all these things on me. And I think like I needed to be able to take the wisdom of what she was saying and not just be so against anything coming from her because she was my mom. And I think she needed to also have a little bit of perspective, like the I'm not God piece of like, yeah, maybe I have a preference for how I would like Ciara to be in the world, but she's her own person on her own journey. And I need to be okay with letting that unfold in other ways. So I think I was thinking of that when you were talking about trying to like manage things with your daughter. And I also really was touched by the unconditional love piece, because like that really is like the way that I healed. And like unconditional love is like not focusing on like what's going wrong. It's like focusing on like the beauty of like what can become. And you know, I think like when someone is like in distress, it's like that's something you can focus on, and focus on, you know, all that's like wrong and all that needs to be different. Or you can like see the bigger picture of like, this is a journey that this beautiful soul is going on that I am witnessing.
Yeah. Well, and I would add to that, and I want people to be able to ask questions too, so we can move into that, because I think some of the questions I'm even going to ask you will show up. For me, it was hard to trust that it was going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, unconditional love seems so easy, but it's so hard to convey. And yeah, and we can talk a little bit more about what that looks like, because, you know, I always say, like, my podcast intro is to love well. You know, that's the tricky part, right? Like, we say love well, but does that mean like have no boundaries, no limits? That's the hard part. Like, what does that look like? But I think that that's where we have to trust and have faith that we're not God, that there is a God that cares, you know, and leaving that piece out is really, I don't think we can do it without that piece. I know I can't, you know, that there's a bigger story happening here. And so I have to remind myself of that every day, because otherwise I am in my control. The message I'm sending is you're not good enough. And I've got to fix you in some way. And if that, you know, if that's making sense to all of you, how I'm explaining it. But, and I was conveying judgment. And I think it's really good how you talked about your mom, because I relate to that too. It was like, it's very easy as moms for us to project, if, you know, I've used that word, hopefully you all know kind of what that means, but to put myself on my daughter. And so she went through a period of time where she really wasn't brushing her hair, and before high school, and she'd have it, and all she'd do is, you know, roll out of bed, throw it up in this thing, and then put on a sweatshirt, and a black sweatshirt and black sweatpants, and go to school. And I was like, oh, this isn't good. Like, I grew up in a family where you try to be all put together. But I think she also was trying to find her own sense of identity apart from me. So that was one way, you know, it's like, I'm rejecting this, have to look all perfect on the outside, Mom. Like, you're putting this on me, and I'm not having it. I'm just, and, you know, put on the black and I'm out the door. And so, you know, or the hoodie. Now it's the hoodie, you know, got the hoodie, and they're looking, they're like this, you know, or looking at the phone. And we could put so much of that on take so much of that on. And we have to, again, remind ourselves, like, okay, this isn't about me. This is this is who they are. And yeah. So who has questions? I see that there's one question here, and then I'm going to go through the chat. Okay. How can you take care of yourself if you suffer with a lot of anxiety yourself? I'm always thinking, what if my daughter won't talk to me about sex and then gets pregnant? Or what if she won't talk to me if she's being bullied and then starts to drink or take drugs to cope with it? These are very extreme examples, but I live in this what if world, and it's so awful. Yeah, thank you for sharing this. Who is relating to this mom? The what ifs. The what ifs. So do you have, me too, Shannon. Yeah. Yeah, yes, for sure. I live in the what if world too. You are also not alone. I want you to know that. Yes, Sally. Yes, the what ifs.
Yeah.
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 Do you have anything to say to this?
Well, I totally get that. I mean, as all of you probably know, I'm not a parent yet, but I know that when there were some things that I did do that were very dangerous and extreme. So my mom was not completely off base to think that, but I think even at just the first sign of, I cut the first time she saw cuts on my arm, she was like, oh my God, you're going to kill yourself tomorrow. And I get that. Like, I get how getting any sort of whiff of like extreme dysfunction and dysregulation, of course, because of this desire to protect your kids, is like, you want to be prepared. Like, I think the what if is coming from an urge to be prepared. Like, I want to almost go to what like the worst possible outcome is so that I know that I'll be able to handle that. And I'm like already readying myself. But to kind of zoom out a bit, it's like, we've brought through so much in this conversation about how your own nervous system and your own emotional state is like co-creating a dynamic. So if you're bringing in that energy of like a future hypothetical, it's like you're bringing that energy in. I'm not saying that means it's going to happen at all, but you're still going to feel that fear in your body. So I think that if what you, and I'm assuming, but this is just what I'm hearing in the question, is like the desire to prepare. I would look for ways that you feel like you can kind of rest that anxiety. Like, maybe it's talking to someone and coming up with an action plan about what you do if that happens. Like, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's like, okay, this happens. I already have a plan. And that's just if it happens. I'm not going to assume it's going to happen, but I know that if that happens, I am like prepared for it. And the other thing I would just say, is someone who also lives a lot in the what ifs, this is just every time I do that, I like try and do the opposite. I know that sometimes these like kind of like singing Kumbaya in a circle type stuff can be like, oh my God, stop. Like that's not what I want to hear right now. But sometimes I think really, really scary, like what ifs. And I'll just think to myself, like, well, what if the opposite happened? What if the opposite was true? What if God took care of this? What if what's happening right now is everything that needs to happen right now for the best possible outcome for all of us?
Yeah. Gosh, that was so good. You answered it differently than I would, and it was so good. Thank you. Because that's super helpful, just how your perspective of, oh my gosh, it makes sense. You go to the what if, because I had some really scary behavior.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. And yeah. So, it's really, I guess I would have to say, from a perspective of, I mean, my daughter did get pregnant, and not, she wasn't married. So right there, that was like one of my worst what ifs. And here I have this amazing, miraculous, two incredible grandchildren that are like the joy of my husband in my life. And it's just amazing. But when she first told me, I was like, I'll just tell you, I was devastated because it was not a good situation. And And, so that happened, but there was, I wouldn't have my 2 grandchildren if it hadn't have happened, so it's, so I don't know if that's comforting or not. I don't always share my personal story to that degree, but I would say that if we are focusing on our relationship with our kids and trying to, cultivate that relationship, listen more, we can share, here's, some of those things that I care about you, I love you, and here's some of the things that I get concerned about, without putting it on them. We can do that. We can share some of our concerns. And, I want to make sure that you're safe. Out of that non-judgmental, caring place, it looks very different. And, through my daughter going through that, I knew the most important thing was that I was connected to her and that I was there for her as she walked through that. So that's what I would say. And I do agree with Ciara, having somebody that we can talk to, because I have a support system, and that's why I started the Inner Circle. And in the fall, I want to incorporate even more groups for all of you, because if you can come and you can, like I was saying with Ciara, like throw up and everybody hold your hair back, like, so to speak, get it out. Being able to talk to somebody about our what ifs can help to, really help to bring down our anxiety. Yeah. Because we're storing it in our body and we're storing it up. And then it's like that snowball running downhill. And a lot of it also, like my big part of my own healing was working through my unfinished business, so to speak. I had to work on those wounds that I had in childhood and really work through that in order to be able to, because I had traumatic things happen. So my brain very much went to the, my primal brain, like, oh my gosh, danger, 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 danger. I've got to, stop this from happening. And working through my own trauma really helped me in being able to bring that down. So, yeah. So hopefully, that's helpful. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, we want to get involved, AKA control and prevent the worst case scenario for them. Yeah, let go, let God. Exactly. Yeah, I know. In theory, it sounds so good, but that's a mantra, right? That's like a really helpful thing to really try to meditate on what that looks like. And some of us really have, we have trust issues and fears that nobody, God, whatever, the universe, we can't trust the world. We can't trust others, that can come into it too. And so that's a process. I just want you all to, just be kind to yourself. We have to be kind to ourselves with where we are today, that there's a purpose and reason we are here right now and we're right where we're meant to be, and sometimes we want to be down the road, but it's okay. It's okay. So anything to add to that before I go into the next question, Ciara?
Said it perfectly.
Okay. Thank you. My daughter is 16 and starting to meet and hang out with boys. It's not a big deal. The big deal is when she wants to go on a date with a boy. I mean, I am really open with her and she seems to be very open with us. I'm so nervous. I believe we had done the best we could do. And now we have to start letting go and let her grow into an adult eventually. Anything, there wasn't really a question, but expressing more that letting go. So what would you say to that, Ciara?
I would say, I think you were kind of saying this before about if your daughter feels that you're a safe space, I would hope and believe that she will be very likely to come to you if there is something that you need to know about. Because I had friends who did have that type of relationship with their mom, and they would go to her and tell her if something was happening. And I was shocked because I was like, oh my God, I would never tell my mom anything about that was happening with me and a boy. And, I would have loved if I could have had that relationship with her, probably some of my own shame for that. And also fearing her maybe anger or judgment towards me. And the kind of, like stories that I had about like, oh, this is going to happen if I tell her. So I think like, as you said, kids are sneaky. They know how to lie. They know how to get around rules. And your daughter at some point, if not now, is going to be in the world and is going to be dating. And all you can do that's kind of within your circle of control is to be a safe space that she can go to if there's something that she needs support with. And then coming back to, as we're saying, like, let go and let God, like, know that she is protected and she's going to be taken care of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And preparing her for that, talking about it, it's hard talking about sex, talking about those uncomfortable things, and acknowledging it's going to be really uncomfortable. And yet we want to make sure that they're safe. We want to talk through what that looks like. We all have different values in that area, but being able to talk about it, telling them that you're there if they need you. Okay, Shannon said thank you. Oh, okay. My daughter says she is thankful to have parents like us. Recently, she asked to go meet a guy at the mall. I just kept thinking she would have lied and said she was going with girlfriends, but she didn't. She came to us.
Yes.
That's good. That's very good. That's awesome that she was honest, and that you can say, I'm so glad that, that you were honest and that you told us that you were going to go meet him, and of course it depends on our kids' ages, and say, okay, what's your plan? How did you, meet him? I mean, I think sometimes, scary in today's world, how do you know him?
That's actually a good point. Because when I was growing up, people didn't meet each other through, like, it was only people that you knew from school.
Yeah.
So there's kind of an automatic, validation that they're safe. But I understand that is something to consider. Like, how did you meet this person?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How old are they? Did you just meet them on the internet? Then that's a whole different conversation. But
that's such a beautiful testament to, Sally, the relationship that you have with your daughter, that, she could have just said she was meeting friends, but she told you the truth because she felt doing that.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions from I got. We'll ask. Okay. Was there a red flag or more than one that you wish your parents had paid attention to?
I would probably I'm going to repeat a little bit what I said before about, like, when you pay attention to the blinking lights, then that can sometimes become a way that stokes the problem, as we've been talking about. I think obviously, like, if someone is cutting themselves or throwing up their food, like, they're in serious distress, and that's something to pay attention to. I don't think that, there was anything that I did that my parents weren't paying attention to, if that makes sense. Like, I think my parents saw the ways that I was expressing my pain and did the best that they could to help. But I'm not sure if this question is maybe asking if, like, there are other things that parents should be watching out for besides, because I feel like most people know if someone is self-harming, like, that's something to get them help with.
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of the moms come to me and because we are scared about suicide. We are scared that, you hear a lot of stories about, I had no idea, that my kid was suicidal. Yeah. And so do you think that, that there's anything that, like, parents need to be doing to see some of the signs? Because I think that's our fear is, oh my gosh, I might miss it. Or my kid's cutting. I hear this a lot from parents. My kid has been cutting for like a year, but it's like cutting on the inside of their inner thigh. And so I couldn't see it, and then the parent feels terrible. So what would how can we help our kids when they're in that place?
Yeah, I unfortunately, I wish I could say, like, if your kid starts wearing green, that means that it's some, you know, that's a sign. But I think what you said is very true. It's like, I really was like an expert at hiding stuff. Like I was really, really good at hiding things from my parents. So even if they were watching for signs, if I didn't want them to know, like they weren't going to know for a while. I mean, eventually they found out everything, but like I could kind of keep it under wraps for a while. So I think just the most important thing to do is to be the safe space where like they feel like they can come to you.
Mm-hmm.
I think like, yeah, I mean, if you can look up like certain, like obviously for different things, there are red flags. Like if someone always goes to the bathroom after eating food, like that might be something to just check in about, because that might mean that they're purging. So there are things like that you can try to pay attention to. Obviously, if there's like an extreme change in their just natural demeanor, like if they used to be talkative and then now all of a sudden they're not hanging out with any friends and they're not talking to you at all, it might just be, you know, hormonal changes for a week or something. But I think as parents, like, you know, you have your own instinct too. Like that's actually probably what I would say the most is like be the safe space and like listen to your own instinct. Cause like if you feel your gut like something is off, then like that's probably something to look at.
Yeah. And then how would you say to approach their kids if they're concerned about that? What would have helped you for your parents to say?
If they were concerned about
That they might be self-harming or their behavior changes.
I think coming and saying like, I love you when I'm here.
Mm,
When I'm here.
yeah. So what were some of, I'm going to ask I have two more questions. We are going to go by 1:30. Is that okay if we make sure we're off by 1:30? Okay. You can go until then. Okay, good. What do you wish that your parents would have done differently or said to you that might have helped you?
I wish they would have said, I wouldn't change a hair on your head. Like, I love you and you're perfect as you are.
Oh.
And in terms of like the support that they could have given me, they did many, many things. And I know it's like, I probably sound like a broken record, but really, if I had just felt that they loved me and that they were there no matter what, and if they had helped me have a relationship with, as we're talking about, God, like a force that's greater than all of us, like for me to have known that at that point would have been so helpful. But it's really as simple as that. Yeah.
Wrote it down. I wouldn't change a hair on your head. Wow. Because you talked in our podcast interview about feeling broken, like something was wrong with you. Do you find that many of the kids that come to you feel like something's wrong with them?
Yes, absolutely.
Would that be almost every single one?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I want to say too, like, I know obviously we're talking to parents right now, but I think there's a lot in our culture now that is so about pathologizing and diagnosing and, you know, picking at every aspect of just being a human, and us having this really fractured relationship with pain and struggle and thinking that there's always something wrong with us and there's always something to be fixed about us. So,
no.
You know, I just want to say, like, it's please don't, as a parent, think that all of that is coming from you. Like, we're in an echo chamber of it. And all you can do is be a channel of love that communicates that they are already whole and healed.
Yeah. Well, I groaned because I think about how many of you feel like you are taking in that message yourself. Like, I'm never good enough. I have to do this to be better. I have to do that to be better. I know I can be on that hamster wheel. I'm not smart enough. I'm not this enough. I'm not whatever, fill in the blank. And And I think through that own feeling of my own inadequacies, I was putting that on my oldest as well, transferring that to her. So it's kind of inside out parenting, isn't it? In many ways,
Yeah.
What's unhelpful? When mom asks, what's unhelpful that, that we can do as parents? And of course, this is one of the things I just want to say, Ciara, I love about you is you've never made your mom or dad bad. When it's not to criticize them, and you have so much compassion. You're like, I was really struggling, but I was also very challenging. And my behavior was really, really scary. And they were trying to do everything they could to help me. So there is absolutely no shame, because we're all human and we're all here learning. And I just feel for your mom. I'm like, I need to have a call with her and we can talk.
No, you 100% should. I've told her about you.
Yeah, because I know how you feel. But so I just don't want us to feel any shame here. But I think it's good to know what's not helpful, because we mean to be helpful. So what are some of those things that aren't helpful? Can you think of some specific examples from your experience, and also what you hear working with the tweens and teens that you work with?
Mm-hmm. I think what's unhelpful is, again, I know I've said this so many times, but just freaking out about the situation. There were a lot of times my mom would kind of come into the pit with me, as I put it, to try and help. But then we were both in the pit, and I almost was like, okay, well, now that you're here, this means that this is really bad, because you're here and you're kind of endorsing this viewpoint. And I'll say at the same time, my dad was a little bit more, she'll figure it out. And so because she'll figure it out, I'm not going to get involved in any way. And I know that there are patterns with moms and dads. Moms tend to be the ones who, as Cheryl's put brilliantly, is taking everyone's temperature and wanting to come in and help. But I think just the kind of constant need to be fixing stuff, going to a room and taking a scan of well, what needs to be better? What needs to be different? That was not the most helpful. And I think, also kind of, when I first started in treatment, it was very much in kind of the medical model, what's the diagnosis? What needs to be the medication? And there was not a lot of looking at the emotional piece or the root causes of what was going on. And that's just something I see a lot of parents do that I work with. They're very, very focused on getting the diagnosis and getting the right medications in order. And it kind of ignores a huge piece of what's going on. So that was not super helpful in my experience.
Yeah. And you were on medication. Now you're totally off all of it.
Yeah, I was on tons, and I came off all of them when I was 18.
Wow. Well, you said a couple really helpful things. I can give it from the mom perspective. When my daughter would be anxious, I can think of one just small situation when she got in the car in middle school. This is Sarah, my oldest, and she was telling me about being bullied by some of her friends. Mm-hmm. I freaked out. I did. I was like, oh my gosh, and so because I was reacting from that freak out perspective, and I'm probably exaggerating, maybe I wasn't as bad as I'm saying, but I remember the anxiety. It brought up all the bullying that I had experienced as a kid. And I just made it bigger than it needed to be. And I didn't really listen. And gosh, that's so, that's awful. So because of that, I made it so much bigger in her mind.
Yeah.
And is that kind of what you're saying, talking about then it became bigger because I was not calm about it.
Yeah. And I think it's hard because at the same time I'm saying don't ignore it. Don't be you're fine.
Yeah. There's a middle ground.
It's a middle ground of I'm with you in this and I'm acknowledging that you're pain, but it's again, I'm seeing the bigger picture. I'm seeing all that you are and all that you can become, and not just this one instance that was really challenging.
Yeah. Because I did it very differently with my daughter that's 9 years younger. I mean, she had the same thing happen because it happens. And I remember going, oh man, that must have hurt. What happened?
Yeah.
And she was like, then she started telling me, and then she cried a little bit. And I'm like, oh, then what happened? Then what did you do? And then she's sharing what she did. And then she was fine. And then next day she got in the car and she's like, oh, we made up. And she said, I really hurt her feelings because I did whatever. And it was fine. But but I look back on how I did it with my oldest, and yeah. And so I like that you said that, that your mom and my daughter, actually, Ciara wrote a blog post that was saying like the don'ts for parents. And she said something about not freaking out because my mom freaked out. I felt like there was a lot of things I couldn't tell her.
Yeah.
Because she would freak out.
Yeah.
A very humbling blog post to read. And then she would say a lot to me, and maybe some of you have heard this. She'd say, it's not about you. Did you ever say that to your mother?
Oh my God, that was like a catchphrase. Yeah.
Because I would be in the pit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she'd be like, this isn't about you. And I would be like, and then I'd be confused, as to how was I making it about me? But she felt it. She felt that it had become about me trying to fix her so I could feel better.
Right.
We're great temperature takers. We walk in there with our thermometer and we just want to take everybody's temperature in the house. And if our kid's okay, if they're not okay, if they're okay, and take their temperature. And I'm sure you probably felt like that. Like I'm the broken one that my parents are always trying to take my temperature to see how I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I noticed the time, and Ciara has become our friend. And here at Moms of Tweens and Teens, so she's going to be back. I'm doing a parenting summit called the Everything Parenting Tweens and Teens Summit, October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And it's free. And Ciara is one of our speakers. So she's kindly agreed to do that. So I'm really excited. And so any encouragement, Ciara, final words. How do they find you? Because I know a lot of them, or you see tweens and teens are thinking, how do I get in touch with you? Where do I find you?
So my website is hominginstinct.org, and you can find me there and reach out there. And I'm on Instagram, not really that much, but I'm on Instagram. It's just my name, Ciara Fanlo. So those are both two ways to reach me. And I think the encouraging words I would give at the end of this are unconditional love and let go and let God.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for coming on and talking to us, and so helpful. And you have such a perspective about, what our kids are going through and what we need to understand and remember. And you're a huge blessing. And we need to internalize these things and remember that it's okay to make mistakes. We're not going to do it perfectly. And our kids don't want us to.
Yeah.
In fact, when we try to do it perfectly, then we're putting more pressure on them, I think.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Because you can model grace and imperfection for them by being like, I didn't do that perfectly and I still love myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope this was all encouraging. You're leaving today feeling filled up and encouraged and knowing you're doing such a good job. And for us all to just remember to trust our kids' process, their growth process, the path they're on, and to really seek to love every hair on their head, just the way that they are right in the here and now, that we all need that. That is our greatest, deepest need, besides food and water, is to know that we are unconditionally loved, no matter where we're at, that we can be our ugliest and, we're still going to be loved. That's what we all long for. So thank you, everybody, so much. You can reach out to Ciara and go to her website, hominginstinct.org, right?
Yes.
And you're always wanting to go home, right? That's how you came up with it. So hominginstinct.org, and reach out to her if you need to, or you'd like one of your kids you think it would be helpful for them to talk to her, and she'll be back.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful day. Johanna, I know it's evening there, so good night to you, and thanks everybody for joining us. Love you all. Okay, bye-bye.